According to Insta360, you can record up to 38 minutes on the new Go 3S standalone, or 140 minutes by placing it into the action pod. But that is when you're recording in 1080p, and let's face it, you're not buying this camera so you can record in 1080p. So the question is, how long can you record in the other video modes, including of course 4K, and once your battery is depleted, how quickly can you recharge and be up and running again? The answer to all these questions and more coming up. Hello and welcome. Thank you for joining us today. Today it's all about battery life and charging on the new Insta360 GO 3S. Now, like its predecessor, the GO 3S has a fixed battery, and of course that means you cannot carry spare batteries around or charge your spare batteries out of the camera, so it's a lot more important to understand how long can you record and how quickly can you recharge and be up and running again. Now, if you've been following the channel, you'll know that I recently posted a similar video for the predecessor, the GO 3, but of course the new GO 3S offers some new recording capabilities, including 4K in standard video, also 4K in the free-frame video, so we want to see how long we can record for in these new modes. As far as the charging is concerned, we know that the new GO 3S has the exact same battery as the GO 3. Also, as far as we can tell, all of the charging hardware is the same, so we should see pretty much identical charging results to the GO 3, but I guess we'll find out in our tests later on. So there is a lot to cover, and as usual I'm going to place the chapters up here and on the video timeline. But before we get into it, just to emphasize, this video is not sponsored, paid for, or influenced in any way. I purchased all of the equipment with my own money, and the opinions are entirely my own. Also, if you are enjoying the video, please remember to give us a like, and also consider subscribing to the channel for a lot more content. So before we get into the testing, let's just review briefly what we already know about the battery on the GO 3S. Like its predecessor, the GO 3, the GO 3S has a 310 mAh battery in the camera itself and a 1270 mAh battery in the action pod. Now, when it comes to the runtime, on the original GO 3, that would give you 45 minutes of runtime just using the camera, or up to 170 minutes of runtime using the camera in the action pod when filming at 1080p. Now, with the GO 3S, these numbers have been reduced. So with the GO 3S, you can only now get 38 minutes of runtime from the camera alone, and only 140 minutes of runtime with the action pod, again while running at 1080p. Now, you would think that the GO 3S would be able to at least match the GO 3 when recording at the same resolution, but if you watch my review video on the GO 3S, you'll know that my theory is that both the GO 3 and GO 3S share exactly the same sensor, something which Insta360 tech support has actually confirmed, but the GO 3S actually illuminates a bigger area of the sensor, so even at the same resolution, it's working harder and hence the lower battery life. But as we said earlier, you don't buy the GO 3S in order to record at 1080p, so we want to know how much battery life you can get when running at higher resolutions like 2.7K and of course 4K, and also running in the free frame mode at 4K, so those are the tests we're going to be doing when it comes to battery life. Now, when it comes to charging, we're talking about an identical battery between the GO 3 and GO 3S, and presumably identical charging hardware. And if we look at the specifications, you can also see that Insta360 has exactly the same charging specifications for both the GO 3 and GO 3S. So I'm really not expecting to see any difference there, but we will be doing the testing just to make sure. Okay, so if you are familiar with the channel, you will probably recognize my just for fun test setup here. I have the camera mounted to the front of this clock here. I have it set to the quick capture mode, so as soon as I hit the button when the clock gets to 12, it's going to power on and immediately start recording in whatever mode I have selected. And of course, we're going to try different modes. So obviously this will give us a nice visual of exactly how long the battery lasts. So now I'm just going to wait until that clock gets to exactly 12 o'clock, and then we're going to start the recording. And there we go. Okay, and now we're going to repeat the same series of tests, but now with the camera inside the action pod. Again, I'm just going to wait until it gets to exactly 12. I'm going to start it using the quick capture mode so it will power on and immediately start recording. So just to recap, the Go 3S has a claimed runtime of 38 minutes on its own, or 140 minutes when combined with the Action Pod. But as we mentioned earlier, this is when recording in 1080p, and as we also mentioned, you're not buying this camera to record in 1080p, you want to be able to record in the maximum resolution of 4K. And when you do that, those numbers come down considerably to just over half an hour of runtime with the camera on its own, or just over 2 hours of runtime with the camera in the Action Pod. Now, what I did find interesting was that it doesn't seem to matter if you're recording 4K in the standard video mode or using the free frame mode. In either mode, you're getting around about half an hour of runtime on the camera and around about 2 hours of runtime on the camera plus Action Pod. Now, if you drop the resolution down from 4K to 2.7K, you can get a little bit more runtime, but it really is only a few minutes. But the main reason I did that test was to do a direct comparison against the Go 3. And based on my testing using 2.7K resolution, I got about 43 minutes out of the Go 3 camera on its own versus 36 minutes out of the Go 3S. And I got 154 minutes when combined with the Action Pod on the Go 3 versus 132 minutes on the Go 3S. So the original Go 3 is giving you about 15% more runtime when filming under the same conditions. So overall, I would say the run times on the Go 3S are pretty respectable for recording at 4K, but if you're not planning to run at 4K and you just want 2.7K, you might be better off going with the original Go 3. So when it comes to the charging tests, I'm going to do exactly the same tests as I did for the original Go 3, and that is to test charging time in 4 different situations. Firstly, charging a fully depleted camera from a fully charged action pod. Secondly, charging the camera from the fully charged action pod, which is also plugged into AC power. Thirdly, charging the fully depleted camera and action pod together. And finally, just charging the depleted action pod by itself. So before we get to the Go 3S results, let's just briefly review the results that we saw when we did the same tests on the original Go 3. Now when it comes to just charging the camera, we charged the Go 3 camera in around about 32 minutes, and we pretty much got an identical result regardless of how we were charging the camera. Charging it from the battery of the action pod, charging it from the fully charged action pod plugged into AC power, or when charging both camera and action pod simultaneously. In all 3 cases we saw around about 32 minutes. And it will come as no surprise that we saw pretty much the same result with the Go 3S, maybe a few seconds longer, but in all cases we were well within the 35 minutes that is specified by Insta360. Now when it comes to charging up the action pod, here the results were a little bit confusing to me. So again, let's recap what we saw when we did the same test on the original Go 3. On the original Go 3, when charging both camera and action pod together, the action pod was fully charged after just over an hour, which again is well within the 65 minutes that Insta360 specifies. If we just charged up the Go 3 action pod on its own, we were able to charge it up in about 52 minutes. Now, strangely, with the Go 3S, we got the opposite results. So when charging both camera and action pod together, we were able to complete that in just over 52 minutes, but when charging the Go 3S action pod on its own, this took just over an hour. Now, initially I thought I must have confused the numbers, but I went back and double checked everything, and these are the correct results. Okay, so what do we conclude after all of our testing? Well, first off, I think we should acknowledge that Insta360 is being pretty honest with its specifications. If you're running at 1080p, you will definitely get the specified runtime, and also when it comes to charging, you will be able to charge up your camera within the time specified. Now, if you consider the total recording time of the Go 3S inside the action pod, it compares fairly favorably to most action cameras out there, but of course if you're buying this camera, you're really buying it for the capability to remove the camera itself, and I think even half an hour of recording time on such a small device is pretty decent. Now, if we compare it to the original Go 3, obviously in order to give the Go 3S its new higher resolution capabilities, Insta360 have had to make some technical changes, and that results in a sacrifice of some of the battery life. So you're basically looking at about a 15% reduction of runtime when filming under the same conditions. So if you're filming 1080p or 2.7K, you're going to get longer runtimes on the Go 3. When it comes to charging, talking about just the camera, you're going to be within the 35 minutes that Insta360 specifies. Also, when charging the action pod, you're well within the 65 minutes that Insta360 specifies, although it's a bit of a mystery to me why the action pod will charge faster with a depleted camera in it than with no camera in it at all. So that wraps it up for today. I hope you got good information out of this video. If so, remember to give us a like and be on the lookout for more content on the Go 3S. Be sure to subscribe and hit the notifications button so you can be alerted whenever those post. Otherwise, thank you for watching.